I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway and saw Brenda Hutchinson standing in my backyard with a measuring tape and a smug expression that could curdle milk. My name is Nathan Thornton, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Gilbert, Arizona, for 3 years without any major problems. Sure, the HOA could be a pain about trash can placement, and the occasional sternly worded letter about my lawn needing to be exactly 2.5 inches tall, but nothing prepared me for what was about to unfold. Brenda was the HOA president, a 47-year-old woman with bleached blonde hair that she wore in what I could only describe as a speak-to-the-manager cut. And she took her position more seriously than most people take their actual careers. I got out of my truck and walked around to the back gate, already feeling my blood pressure rising. Brenda had been a thorn in my side since I moved in, always finding something to complain about. Last month it was the color of my front door being too vibrant, even though it was well within the approved palette. The month before that, she claimed my mailbox was 3 inches too far to the left. I wish I was exaggerating. "Brenda, what are you doing in my yard?" I called out, trying to keep my voice level. She looked up with that infuriating smile she always wore when she thought she had caught someone in a violation. "Nathan, good, you are home. I am just doing some measurements for my new fence extension. You will notice the work starting tomorrow morning." I walked closer and saw stakes with bright orange tape marking a line that cut a solid 6 feet into my property. My property. The line extended from her existing fence all the way to the back corner, enclosing what had been my side yard into her space. "Excuse me. That is my yard, Brenda. You cannot just take my property." She waved her hand dismissively. I checked the HOA bylaws, and as president, I have the authority to make adjustments to property lines when it benefits the overall aesthetic of the community. Your yard is underutilized, and I need the space for my garden expansion. I stood there for a moment, genuinely stunned. I had dealt with entitled people before, but this was a whole new level. "Brenda, that is not how property lines work. You cannot just change them because you want more space. That is illegal." "It is not illegal when it is approved by the HOA board," she said, her voice taking on that condescending tone she used when she thought she was educating someone beneath her. "I called a special meeting yesterday, and the board voted unanimously. A meeting I was not notified about. And let me guess, you are the entire board. I am the president, Deborah Ellis is the treasurer, and Pamela Rogers is the secretary. We all agreed. The notice will be in your mailbox by the end of the week." Deborah and Pamela were Brenda's best friends, which everyone in the neighborhood knew. They did everything together and always backed up whatever insane scheme Brenda came up with. This was clearly just another power play, but this time she had gone too far. "I am calling my lawyer," I said firmly. "You are not touching my property." Brenda laughed, actually laughed. "Go ahead. By the time any lawyer does anything, my fence will already be up. And good luck finding someone willing to fight the HOA. It will cost you thousands, Nathan. Just accept it and move on." She packed up her measuring tape and walked back toward her house like she had just won the lottery. I stood in my yard, hands clenched, trying to figure out my next move. I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything with photos and videos, making sure to capture the stakes and the clear encroachment into my property. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Brenda's smug face and her absolute certainty that she could do whatever she wanted. At 6 in the morning, I was awakened by the sound of trucks and voices. I rushed to my window and saw a fence company already setting posts along the line Brenda had marked. I threw on clothes and ran outside. "Hey, stop! You are building on my property," The foreman, a heavy-set man in his 50s, looked at me with sympathy. "Sorry, buddy. We are just doing the job we were hired for. You will have to take it up with the homeowner." "I am the homeowner of this land you are digging into." He pulled out a work order. "Says here we are working for Brenda Hutchinson, and she provided a survey showing this is her property line." "That survey is fake. This is my land. If you continue, I will call the police." The foreman sighed and pulled out his phone. "Let me call Mrs. Hutchinson." Within 5 minutes, Brenda appeared in her backyard wearing a designer tracksuit and oversized sunglasses despite the early hour. "Nathan, you are disrupting legitimate construction work." "Legitimate?" "You are building a fence on my property, Brenda. This is theft. This is trespassing. This is illegal. I have a survey that says otherwise." She produced a rolled-up document from seemingly nowhere and handed it to the foreman, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need an officer at 4782 Saguaro Lane in Gilbert. Someone is illegally constructing on my property." Brenda's expression finally showed a crack in her confidence. "You are overreacting. This is a civil matter. Trespassing and property destruction are criminal matters," I said. 20 minutes later, a Gilbert Police Department officer arrived. His name tag read Officer Martinez, and he looked like he had dealt with HOA disputes before based on his immediately tired expression. "All right, what is going on here?" he asked. I explained the situation while Brenda kept interrupting with her version, which involved a lot of dramatic hand gestures and references to HOA authority. Officer Martinez asked to see property documents. I pulled up my property survey on my phone, which I had scanned after buying the house. Brenda showed him her survey, which I immediately noticed had yesterday's date on it. "Madam, this survey is dated yesterday," Officer Martinez pointed out. "Yes, I had it done recently to confirm the property lines," Brenda said, her voice tight. "And sir, you have the original survey from when you purchased the property 3 years ago." "Yes, and I can get the physical copy from inside if you need it." Officer Martinez looked at the fence crew. "I am going to need you all to stop work until this is resolved. This appears to be a disputed property line, and continuing construction could be considered criminal trespassing and vandalism." The foreman looked relieved to have a reason to stop. "Understood, officer. We will pack up." Brenda's face turned red. "Officer, I am the HOA president. I have the authority to make these decisions for the community." "Madam, an HOA does not have the authority to change legal property lines. That would require a formal survey, agreement from both property owners, and official county recording. What you are describing is property theft." "This is ridiculous. Nathan, you are going to regret this. The HOA will make your life miserable." Officer Martinez turned to her sharply. "Madam, that sounds like a threat. I suggest you back off and handle this through proper legal channels. If you attempt to continue construction without resolving the property dispute, you will be charged with trespassing and possibly other crimes." Brenda stormed off, and the fence crew packed up their equipment. Officer Martinez took statements from both of us and told me to contact the county assessor's office to get an official property survey done as soon as possible. He also suggested I document everything and consider getting a restraining order if Brenda continued to harass me. After everyone left, I sat on my back porch and tried to process what had just happened. I had heard stories about nightmare HOAs, but experiencing it firsthand was surreal. I immediately called a real estate attorney whose number I found online, and surprisingly, she was willing to see me that same afternoon. Her name was Diana Edwards, and her office was in downtown Gilbert. She was in her mid-30s, sharp-eyed, and she listened to my entire story without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head. I have dealt with aggressive HOAs before, but this is blatant property theft. The good news is you have clear documentation, and the police are already aware of the situation. The bad news is that fighting an HOA can be expensive and time-consuming. I do not care about the cost. She cannot just steal my land. Deanna nodded. I agree. Here is what we are going to do. First, I will file an emergency restraining order against Brenda Hutchinson and the HOA to prevent any further construction or harassment. Second, we will get an official survey done by a licensed surveyor. Third, we will send a cease and desist letter to the HOA board. And fourth, if they do not back down, we will file a lawsuit for attempted property theft, harassment, and violation of your property rights. How long will this take? The restraining order could be approved within a few days. The survey will take about a week. The rest depends on how stubborn they want to be. I left her office feeling slightly better but still angry. I spent the rest of the day documenting everything, including taking measurements of my property and comparing them to the original survey. Everything confirmed what I already knew. Brenda was trying to steal 6 feet of my property, which amounted to about 900 square feet of land. That evening, I received an email from the HOA with the subject line, Property Line Adjustment Notice. I opened it and felt my blood boil. It was an official-looking document claiming that the HOA board had voted to realign property boundaries to improve community aesthetics and functionality. My property was being reduced by 900 square feet, which would be added to Brenda's property. The notice stated that the decision was final, and any disputes would be handled through HOA arbitration, which could cost up to $5,000. I forwarded the email to Deanna immediately with a message saying this had just escalated to a whole new level. She called me within an hour. Nathan, this is even better for our case. They just put in writing that they are attempting to steal your property. This is going to be an easy win, but we need to move fast. I am filing for the emergency restraining order first thing tomorrow morning. The next 2 days were tense. I worked from home, constantly watching my backyard to make sure Brenda did not try anything. I saw her in her yard several times, always staring at the property line with that same determined expression. On the third day, Deanna called with good news. The judge approved the temporary restraining order. Brenda Hutchinson and the HOA are prohibited from entering your property, constructing anything on or near the disputed property line, and contacting you directly. I am having it served right now. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you, Deanna. What happens next? We wait for the official survey results, which should be done in a few days. In the meantime, if Brenda violates the restraining order, call the police immediately. Do not engage with her yourself. That afternoon, I watched from my window as a process server knocked on Brenda's door. I could not hear what was said, but I saw her face go from annoyed to furious as she read the documents. She looked toward my house, and for a moment I thought she might march over, but she went back inside and slammed the door. For about a week, things were quiet. The surveyor came out and spent several hours measuring and marking my property. He confirmed what I already knew: my original survey was accurate, and Brenda's recent survey was completely fraudulent. The property line was exactly where it had always been, and her fence would have encroached 6 feet onto my land. Deanna filed the official survey with the county and sent a comprehensive cease and desist letter to the HOA board, Brenda personally, and the fence company that had attempted the construction. The letter detailed the fraud, the attempted property theft, and the legal consequences if they did not immediately withdraw their property line adjustment notice and issue a formal apology. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. But I underestimated Brenda's stubbornness and her complete inability to admit she was wrong. 2 days after the cease and desist was delivered, I came home from a meeting to find that Brenda had built the fence anyway. Not on my property line this time, but right at the disputed location. 6 feet into my yard, there was now a 6-foot-tall wooden privacy fence running the entire length of her property. I could not believe what I was seeing. She had violated a court order. She had ignored the cease and desist. She had just committed what was essentially a criminal act out of pure spite and entitlement. I immediately called Deanna, who sounded genuinely shocked. She built it anyway, after the restraining order. Yes, it is standing in my yard right now. Do not touch it. Do not go near it. I am calling the police and the sheriff's office. This is now a criminal matter. She has violated a court order, which is contempt of court. She is going to be arrested, Nathan. Within an hour, my street was filled with police cars. Officer Martinez was there again, along with several other officers and a sheriff's deputy named Deputy Clark. Deanna arrived shortly after with all the legal documentation. Brenda came out of her house, still wearing that infuriating, confident expression. "Officers, can I help you?" Deputy Clark, a stern-looking woman in her 40s, held up the restraining order. "Mrs. Hutchinson, you are in violation of a court-ordered restraining order. This fence you constructed is on property that is under legal dispute, and you were specifically prohibited from any construction activity." "That is my property. I have every right to build on my own land." Officer Martinez stepped forward. "Madam, we have been over this. The official county survey confirms that this fence is built on Mr. Thornton's property. You are in violation of the restraining order, which is a criminal offense." Deanna added, "Mrs. Hutchinson, you are also in contempt of court. The judge is going to want to see you." For the first time, I saw genuine fear cross Brenda's face. "This is absurd. I am the HOA president. I was acting in the best interest of the community." "You were acting illegally," Deputy Clark said firmly. "You are under arrest for contempt of court and criminal trespassing. You have the right to remain silent." I watched as they read Brenda her rights and put her in handcuffs. The look on her face was a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief. Several neighbors had come out to watch, and I could see some of them recording on their phones. Brenda had made herself unpopular with a lot of people over the years, and there was definitely some satisfaction in the air. After Brenda was taken away, Deputy Clark approached me. "Mr. Thornton, we need to figure out what to do about this fence. It is technically on your property, which means it is your decision." "I want it removed," I said without hesitation. "Understandable. However, since Mrs. Hutchinson paid for its construction, the court will likely order her to remove it herself as part of her sentencing. Would you be willing to wait for that?" Deanna jumped in. "Deputy, given Mrs. Hutchinson's behavior, I think we should request immediate removal with her present. She needs to understand the consequences of her actions, and having her physically dismantle what she illegally built would be appropriate." Deputy Clark considered this and nodded. "I will speak with the judge. Given the contempt charge, this could be arranged." Over the next few days, things moved quickly through the legal system. Brenda was released on bail but had to appear before the judge who had issued the original restraining order. Deanna and I attended the hearing, and I watched as the judge absolutely tore into Brenda for her blatant disregard of the court order. "Mrs. Hutchinson, you willfully violated a restraining order issued by this court. You constructed a fence on property that was explicitly under dispute and that you were ordered to stay away from. This is not only contempt of court, but also criminal trespassing and vandalism. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Brenda's lawyer, a nervous-looking young man, tried to argue that she genuinely believed she was within her rights as HOA president. The judge was not having it. An HOA president does not have the authority to violate property law or court orders. "Mrs. Hutchinson, you are hereby found in contempt of court. You are sentenced to 30 days in jail, suspended pending completion of community service and immediate restitution to Mr. Thornton. Additionally, you will personally dismantle and remove the fence you illegally constructed under supervision of the Sheriff's Department. This will take place within the next 72 hours. Brenda looked like she had been slapped. "Your Honor, I cannot possibly take down an entire fence by myself. You managed to have it built quickly enough. You will figure it out. If the fence is not completely removed within 72 hours, you will serve the full 30 days in jail. Court is adjourned." 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, Deputy Clark arrived at my house with Brenda in tow. Brenda looked like she had not slept in days. Her perfect hair was messy, her clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes were red. "Mr. Thornton, we are here for the fence removal as ordered by the court," Deputy Clark said professionally. I nodded and led them to the backyard. The fence stood there, a monument to Brenda's arrogance and entitlement. Deputy Clark handed Brenda a tool belt with a hammer and crowbar. "You can begin, Mrs. Hutchinson." "This is humiliating," Brenda muttered. "You humiliated yourself when you broke the law," Deputy Clark said without sympathy. "Start with the panels." I sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee and watched as Brenda began dismantling the fence she had so proudly and illegally constructed. It was slow going at first. She clearly had no idea how to use the tools properly, and several times she had to stop and ask Deputy Clark for help. Each panel that came down felt like justice being served. Several neighbors came by to watch, which only added to Brenda's humiliation. Tom Richardson from across the street brought his lawn chair and sat at the fence line. "Hey Nathan, this is better than anything on TV." "Tom, you are terrible," I said, but I could not help laughing. Brenda glared at us but kept working. The fence was well built, which ironically made it harder for her to take apart. Every nail she pulled out, every board she removed was a visible reminder that actions have consequences. By noon, she had only removed about a third of the fence. She was sweating, her hands were blistered, and she looked absolutely miserable. Deputy Clark gave her a 15-minute break to drink water and rest, but then she had to get back to work. "How much longer is this going to take?" Brenda asked desperately. Deputy Clark checked her watch. "You have until tomorrow evening to finish. I suggest you keep working." The afternoon wore on and more neighbors came by. Some were openly supportive of me, others just curious. The HOA had been unpopular for years, and Brenda had been at the center of most of the complaints. Seeing her forced to undo her own illegal actions was cathartic for a lot of people. By evening, Brenda had removed about half the fence. Her hands were bleeding from blisters and she could barely lift the hammer anymore. Deputy Clark finally called it for the day. "Mrs. Hutchinson, you need to be back here tomorrow morning at 8 to finish. If this fence is not completely removed by tomorrow evening, you go to jail. Understood?" Brenda nodded weakly and stumbled back to her house. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The next morning, Brenda showed up with bandaged hands and a completely defeated expression. She did not say a word to anyone, just started pulling down fence panels. By mid-afternoon, the fence was completely dismantled, and Brenda was loading the wood into a truck she had rented. "Where should I take this?" she asked Deputy Clark quietly. "That is your problem, Mrs. Hutchinson. Just make sure it is completely removed from Mr. Thornton's property." It took another 2 hours for Brenda to load everything up and haul it away. When she was finally done, Deputy Clark inspected the area to make sure everything was cleared. "All right, Mr. Thornton, your property is restored. Mrs. Hutchinson, you have fulfilled this part of the court order. You still have community service to complete and restitution to pay." Brenda got in her truck and drove away without looking back. I stood in my yard, looking at the empty space where the illegal fence had been, and felt a sense of profound satisfaction. But the story was not over yet. The following week, I received notice that the HOA was calling an emergency meeting to discuss Brenda's removal as president. Apparently, her arrest and the fence incident had been the final straw for many residents. I attended the meeting, which was held at the community center. The room was packed with homeowners, many of whom I recognized but had never spoken to. Deborah Ellis and Pamela Rogers sat at the front table, looking extremely uncomfortable. Brenda was notably absent. A homeowner named Marcus Chen stood up and called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming. We are here to discuss the future of our HOA board in light of recent events. As many of you know, our president, Brenda Hutchinson, was arrested and convicted of contempt of court and criminal trespassing. This has brought negative attention to our community and has raised serious questions about how our HOA has been operating. People started talking all at once, and Marcus had to call for order. One by one, homeowners stood up and shared their own horror stories about Brenda and the HOA board. Ridiculous fines for minor infractions, arbitrary rule enforcement, intimidation tactics. The stories went on for over an hour. Finally, someone made a motion to remove Brenda as president and to recall the entire board. The vote was nearly unanimous. Deborah and Pamela tried to defend themselves, but it was clear they had lost all credibility by going along with Brenda's schemes for so long. A new interim board was elected, including Marcus Chen as president. One of the first things they did was vote to rescind all the ridiculous fines and rules that Brenda had implemented over the years. They also voted to issue me a formal apology and to reimburse me for my legal fees. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Brenda. "You did what a lot of us were too scared to do," said Mrs. Patterson from down the street. "She needed to be stopped." A few weeks later, I received a check from the HOA for my legal fees, along with a formal letter of apology signed by the new board. Deanna called to let me know that Brenda had also been ordered to pay me restitution for the property damage and harassment, though she doubted Brenda would pay without further legal action. "She is also facing a lawsuit from the fence company," Deanna added. Apparently, she never paid them for the work, and now they want their money plus damages for being involved in illegal activity. "Good," I said. "Maybe she will finally learn that she cannot just do whatever she wants." Over the next few months, life in Meadowbrook Heights slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board was reasonable and focused on actual community improvement rather than petty power plays. Brenda put her house up for sale and moved out of the neighborhood before the end of summer. Deborah and Pamela kept to themselves and eventually resigned from the board entirely. I renovated my backyard, putting in a nice garden where the illegal fence had been. Every time I looked at it, I felt satisfied knowing that I had stood up for my rights and won. It had been stressful and expensive, but it had been worth it. One evening, I was sitting on my back porch when my new neighbor, who had bought Brenda's old house, came over to introduce himself. His name was David Trent, and he was a software engineer who had just relocated from California for work. "Hey, I heard about what happened with the previous owner," he said. That must have been intense. It was definitely an experience, I said, but it worked out in the end. Well, I just want you to know that I have no plans to extend any fences into your yard, he said with a laugh. I actually hate HOAs. I almost did not buy this house because of it, but everyone told me things had changed. They have, I assured him. The new board is actually reasonable. We talked for a while, and it felt good to have a normal neighbor conversation without any underlying tension or drama. David seemed like a good guy, and I was glad to have him as a neighbor instead of Brenda. A few months after that, I received a letter from the county courthouse. Brenda had been sued by 3 other homeowners for various HOA-related abuses, and all 3 cases had been settled in favor of the homeowners. The letter informed me that, as part of a larger investigation, the state attorney general's office was looking into HOA fraud and abuse cases, and they wanted to interview me about my experience. I met with an investigator named Sarah Mitchell at a coffee shop in downtown Gilbert. She was in her 30s, professional, and clearly took her job seriously. I told her the entire story, from the initial property line dispute to the fence removal to the HOA board recall. Mr. Thornton, your case is part of a larger pattern we are seeing across Arizona, Sarah explained. HOA boards are given significant power, but there is often little oversight. People like Brenda Hutchinson take advantage of this to essentially run their neighborhoods like personal fiefdoms. We are working on legislation to create better oversight and to make it easier for homeowners to fight back against abusive HOAs. That would be great, I said. No one should have to go through what I went through just to protect their own property. I agree. Your case is actually one of the more clear-cut examples of HOA abuse, which is why we are using it as a reference case. Would you be willing to testify if this goes before the state legislature? Absolutely. Over the next year, I became somewhat of a reluctant advocate for HOA reform. I testified before a state legislative committee about my experience, and my story was featured in several local news articles. The attention was uncomfortable at times, but I felt like I was helping to prevent other people from going through the same nightmare. The Arizona legislature eventually passed new laws requiring better oversight of HOA boards, including mandatory third-party audits, clearer rules about board elections, and easier paths for homeowners to challenge HOA decisions. It was not perfect, but it was a significant improvement. Through all of this, life in Meadowbrook Heights continued to improve. The new HOA board focused on actual community needs like maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and addressing safety concerns. People started to feel like they were part of a community again, rather than living under a dictatorship. I ran into Marcus Chen at the grocery store one day, and he thanked me again for everything that had happened. You know, Nathan, before all this went down, people were actually talking about disbanding the HOA entirely. Things were that bad, but now we have a chance to show that an HOA can actually serve its intended purpose. So thank you for standing up to Brenda. I was just protecting my property, I said, but I am glad something good came out of it. More than you know. We have had several new families move in recently, and they all commented on how welcoming the community feels now. That was not the case a year ago. As for Brenda, I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she had moved to a condo in Scottsdale that was not part of an HOA. The irony was not lost on anyone. Deborah and Pamela apparently stopped speaking to her after they were forced off the HOA board, blaming her for ruining their reputations in the community. The fence company sued Brenda and won a judgment for the unpaid work plus damages. The surveying company that had created the fraudulent survey for her was also investigated and lost their license. Brenda herself faced additional fines from the county for the illegal construction, and she was required to complete 200 hours of community service. Deanna called me one day with a final update. "Nathan, I just wanted to let you know that Brenda's restitution payment finally cleared. You should see the money in your account within a few days. This officially closes out your case. Thank you for everything, Deanna. I could not have done this without you. You stood up for yourself when a lot of people would have just given in. That takes courage, and you helped change things for a lot of other people too." After we hung up, I sat on my back porch and looked at my garden. It had grown beautifully over the past year, with tomatoes, peppers, and herbs thriving in the Arizona sun. This was exactly what I had envisioned when I bought the house, a peaceful place to relax and enjoy my property. My phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. The restitution payment from Brenda had arrived, $15,000 covering my legal fees, property damages, and compensation for harassment. It felt like the final chapter closing on a very long and exhausting story. That weekend, I hosted a barbecue for my neighbors. David came over with his wife Nicole, and Marcus brought his family. Several other neighbors showed up, and we spent the afternoon eating, laughing, and just enjoying each other's company. This was what a community was supposed to feel like. As the sun set and people started heading home, David pulled me aside. "Hey, I just want to say thanks for standing up to the old HOA regime. I have lived in some nightmare HOA communities before, and I was really worried when I moved here. But this place feels different. People actually seem to like living here." "It almost was not this way," I admitted. "If Brenda had gotten away with stealing my property, who knows what she would have tried next? Well, she did not get away with it, and now we all benefit from that." After everyone left, I cleaned up and sat back down on my porch. The night was cool, and I could hear crickets chirping in the desert landscape. I thought about everything that had happened: the initial shock of seeing Brenda measuring my yard, the confrontation, the illegal fence, the arrest, the court-ordered removal, and all the aftermath that followed. It had been one of the most stressful experiences of my life, but I did not regret fighting back. I had learned that standing up for yourself matters, even when it is difficult and expensive. I had learned that bad people only get away with things when good people do not push back. And I had learned that communities can heal and change when people work together. My property was secure. My community was better. And Brenda Hutchinson was gone, hopefully learning that being an HOA president did not give her the right to break the law and steal from her neighbors. I raised my beer in a silent toast to property rights, to justice, and to the sheriff who had made Brenda tear down her illegal fence piece by piece. It had been the perfect consequence for her actions, visible, humiliating, and impossible to ignore. The next morning, I woke up to a notification from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA group email. The new board was announcing a community improvement project to update the playground equipment in the common area, and they were asking for volunteers and input. I smiled and made a note to attend the meeting. This was the kind of HOA activity that actually mattered. As I got ready for work, I looked out my back window at the garden where the illegal fence had once stood. The tomatoes were ripe, and I made a mental note to harvest them that evening. This space, my space, was exactly as it should be: under my control, on my property, and free from anyone trying to take it from me. I thought about Brenda occasionally, usually when I was working in that garden. I wondered if she had learned anything from the experience, or if she was just bitter about being caught. I hoped she had learned, but realistically, people like her rarely changed. They just found new places to exercise their need for control. But that was not my problem anymore. My problem had been solved the day a judge ordered her to personally dismantle her illegal fence under the supervision of the sheriff. Justice had been served in the most literal and satisfying way possible. The irony of the whole situation was not lost on me. Brenda had spent years using the HOA as a weapon against neighbors, hiding behind bylaws and regulations to make people's lives difficult. But when she decided to break actual laws and violate court orders, all that fake authority evaporated. She had learned the hard way that being an HOA president did not put her above the law. Several months later, I received an invitation to speak at an HOA reform advocacy group meeting in Phoenix. They wanted me to share my story with other homeowners who were dealing with abusive HOAs. I agreed and drove up to Phoenix on a Saturday afternoon. The meeting was held in a community center, and I was surprised to see over 100 people there. The organizer, a woman named Jennifer Martinez, introduced me and gave a brief overview of my case. Then I stood up and told my story. I talked about the initial property line dispute, about Brenda's arrogance and entitlement, about the illegal fence construction, and about the court-ordered removal. I talked about the importance of documenting everything, of knowing your rights, and of not being afraid to fight back even when it seemed expensive or difficult. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. During the question and answer session, people shared their own HOA horror stories. One man had been fined $5,000 for painting his house an unapproved color, even though it was nearly identical to the approved palette. A woman had been threatened with foreclosure over $75 in late fees that she insisted she had paid on time. The stories went on and on. The key is documentation and knowing when to get legal help, I told them. I know lawyers are expensive, but sometimes it is worth it. And with the new laws that have passed, it is getting easier to fight back against abusive HOAs. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me and to ask for advice on their specific situations. I gave them Deanna's contact information and encouraged them to stand up for themselves. Driving home that evening, I felt a strange sense of purpose. I had not asked to become an advocate for HOA reform. I had just wanted to protect my property. But my willingness to fight back had created ripples that extended far beyond my backyard. Life continued to move forward. The garden flourished. The neighborhood remained peaceful under the new HOA board. I even started dating someone I met through a friend, a teacher named Danielle Edwards who thought my HOA story was equal parts horrifying and hilarious. So she actually had to tear down the fence herself. Danielle asked over dinner one night. Every single board, I confirmed, with the sheriff watching to make sure she did it. That is the most perfectly ironic justice I have ever heard. She built it illegally, so she had to unbuild it publicly. It was pretty satisfying to watch, not going to lie, Danielle laughed. I would have paid to see that. In my experience, people like her never really face consequences. They just move on to the next thing. She faced consequences this time. And hopefully, she thinks twice before trying something like that again. A year after the fence incident, the new HOA board held an anniversary celebration for the new era of Meadowbrook Heights. They had transformed the community in that time, adding new amenities, organizing regular social events, and creating a genuine sense of community that had been absent under Brenda's leadership. At the celebration, Marcus gave a speech thanking everyone who had helped make the changes possible. He specifically mentioned me and my willingness to stand up to the old board, which earned me a round of applause that made me uncomfortable, but also proud. Nathan showed us that we did not have to accept abuse from people in positions of authority, Marcus said. His courage inspired the rest of us to demand better, and look at where we are now. This is what a real community looks like. After the speech, several people came up to talk to me. Many of them admitted that they had been afraid to speak up when Brenda was in charge, worried about retaliation or harassment. My case had shown them that the system could work if you were willing to fight for your rights. I actually thought about moving, Tom Richardson confessed. Brenda had it out for me because my lawn was not perfect. She threatened to fine me every week. But after what happened with you, I realized I did not have to live in fear. So I stayed, and now I am glad I did. As the celebration wound down and the sun set over the Arizona desert, I looked around at my neighbors laughing and talking, at children playing on the new playground equipment, at a community that had healed from years of toxic leadership. This was worth fighting for. This was worth the stress and the money and the time. The fence was gone. Brenda was gone. The fear was gone, and in its place was something real and valuable, a community where people looked out for each other instead of looking for violations to report. I never saw Brenda again after she moved away, which was fine with me. I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. She had apparently tried to join the board of her new condo association, but was rejected once they learned about her history. She had filed for bankruptcy due to the legal fees and judgments against her. She had become something of a cautionary tale in HOA reform circles. Part of me felt a tiny bit of sympathy for how far she had fallen. But mostly, I felt that justice had been appropriately served. She had spent years making people's lives miserable from her position of petty authority. She had tried to literally steal my property because she thought she could get away with it, and she had learned the hard way that actions have consequences. 2 years after the fence incident, I was offered a promotion at work that would require relocating to Tucson. It was a great opportunity, but it meant leaving Meadowbrook Heights. As I considered the decision, I realized how much I would miss this community. Not because of the physical location, but because of what it represented, proof that standing up to bullies and fighting for what is right can actually make a difference. I ultimately decided to take the promotion, and I put my house on the market. It sold quickly to a young couple who loved the neighborhood and the garden I had built. When I met them to sign the closing papers, I told them the story of the fence and Brenda and everything that had happened. "Wow," the husband said. "That is insane." "But it sounds like the HOA is much better now, completely different," I assured them. "The new board is reasonable and actually cares about the community. You will be happy here." On my last day in the house, I stood in the backyard one final time, looking at the spot where the illegal fence had stood. The garden had been removed by the landscapers, but I could still picture where everything had been. This space had become symbolic of something larger: the importance of defending your rights, the power of community action, and the satisfaction of seeing justice served. I thought about Deputy Clark's face as she handed Brenda the tools to tear down the fence. I thought about the sound of each board being pulled free. I thought about how visible and public the consequences had been. Brenda had not just lost in court, she had been forced to physically undo her crime in front of the people she had spent years trying to intimidate. As I drove away from Meadowbrook Heights for the last time, I felt grateful for the experience, as difficult as it had been. It had taught me that I was stronger than I thought, that the legal system could work when properly utilized, and that communities could heal and improve when good people refused to accept bad behavior. Tucson was a new chapter, a new beginning. But I would always remember the fence, the fight, and the sheriff who made sure that justice was served piece by piece. The story of HOA Karen Brenda Hutchinson and her illegal fence became something I told at parties, a cautionary tale that people found both entertaining and infuriating. It resonated with anyone who had ever dealt with petty authority figures or bureaucratic nonsense. And it always ended the same way, with Brenda being forced to tear down her illegal fence under court order while the sheriff watched. That image of Brenda sweating and struggling to dismantle what she had so arrogantly built remained the perfect ending to the story. It was justice in its most visible and satisfying form. It was proof that sometimes, when you stand up for yourself and refuse to back down, you really can win. And that fence, or rather the absence of it, stood as a permanent reminder that property rights matter, that laws apply to everyone regardless of their position, and that entitled people who think they are above consequences can be proven spectacularly wrong. Years later, I still occasionally got emails from people who had heard my story and were facing their own HOA nightmares. I always gave them the same advice: document everything, know your rights, get a good lawyer, and do not be afraid to fight back. Most of all, I told them that winning was possible, that justice could be served, and that standing up to bullies was always worth it in the end. The fence was gone, but its legacy remained. It remained in the reformed HOA laws in Arizona. It remained in the improved community at Meadowbrook Heights. It remained in the cautionary tale that Brenda had become. And it remained in my own memory as a reminder that I had the strength to stand up for myself when it mattered most. That was the real story of the HOA Karen who extended her fence into my yard, and then was forced by the sheriff to tear it down piece by piece. Not just a tale of property disputes and legal battles, but a story about courage, justice, and the importance of refusing to be bullied no matter how much authority someone claims to have.